I'm delighted to say that we're going to be joined by Ellie Hansen from Avask to talk about EPR, which is some new legislation which is definitely going to impact you. If you're selling in France, it will already have impacted you. If you're selling in Germany, it's coming soon. Undoubtedly, it will be coming to the UK because it's a revenue raiser, effectively. I don't want to call it a tax, but it feels like a tax. So I'm going to hand you over to Mike, our co-host for the day from Avask, and Ellie Hansen to walk you through. As always, if you've got any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box just below the screen where you can you're viewing this. That's if you're watching it live. If you're watching on demand, then avaskgroup.com, the URL on the screen, you'll be able to get in touch with Mike and Ellie there. So welcome back to Tambo, Mike. I'll hand over to you and let's find out more about EPR.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's delightful to be back here talking to you about EPR. And I'm especially delighted to introduce Ellie Hansen. Ellie, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Mike. How are you?
Yeah, not bad at all, thank you. So tell us, what is EPR and what do we need to know about EPR?
That's a really good question. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining this afternoon. I'm just going to run through a quick presentation for you just to give you a little bit more information about the upcoming legislation changes, especially in Germany, and about the legislation changes that have already occurred in France. My name is Ellie Hansen. As Chris and Mike already said, I am the EPR program lead here at Avask. We have an international team full of language speakers that are fully equipped to answer any questions that you may have on the subject. I know it's something that has popped up very recently. It's a big change moving into the French and the German market. It's definitely something to be aware of. So we are on hand for any support you may need. So what is EPR? EPR stands for Extended Producer Responsibility, and although it's a new thing for the EU, it's a new thing for OMPs overall, it's a new thing for a lot of sellers, it's not a new thing in itself. It originally started in Sweden in the late 1980s. It's essentially an environmental policy requiring producers to take responsibility for the entire life cycle of the goods that they're putting onto the market. This then also includes their eventual disposal as well. By taking responsibility, the producers will be required to pay eco-contributions, which, as Chris mentioned earlier, is just a fancy environmental term for an additional taxation, to fund the sustainable disposal of the products that they're putting onto the market. So therefore, under the updated EPR regulations, the liable entities must alleviate the environmental impact of their products throughout the entire life cycle. It's essentially a dressed up way of placing a taxation onto the goods that are being put into the market to increase the and up the sustainability efforts, making goods into higher secondary resources. So moving on to who does it cover? I mentioned before that it covers you if you are a producer. Now, you are considered a producer of these goods if you firstly manufacture a product subject to EPR requirements in either France or Germany. You're importing a product subject to EPR requirements into either of those countries, or if you're selling a product subject to EPR requirements into France and Germany. If you are a producer of the goods in the scope of EPR requirements, you'll be obliged to provide your EPR registration number to your online marketplace to show compliance. Just giving you a couple of circumstances for registration here. So if you are considered a producer, so if you're importing, manufacturing or selling onto the German or French markets, you will be required to obtain and register an EPR number. On the rare occasion that you're not a producer, but you're selling products subject to these EPR requirements, you'll need to obtain the applicable registration number from your upstream supplier. But in the case of this, that your upstream supplier will not provide you with the registration number, you will then also be required to register for yourself. By uploading this number onto your OMP, it's just proof of compliance for the new EPR legislations. However, much like with VAT, your OMP will be obliged to restrict you or suspend you from posting non-compliant items under the relevant product categories. So it's something to definitely be aware of when you're moving or selling into the German and French markets. So I mentioned categories before. Unlike kind of any other legislation, it's very targeted on categories at which your products fall under. It's not at a product level, it's very much at a company level, and it's looking at the goods that you're selling onto the market. So in France, they have more categories than in Germany. So we're looking at packaging, electronic and electronic equipment, batteries, furniture, tires, paper, textiles, and they've just introduced 2 new ones, which are chemicals and piercing medical equipment. In Germany, they've restricted their number of categories slightly. So we just have packaging, electronic and electronic equipment, and batteries. So if you're selling goods into these markets that fall into these categories, you'll be obliged to register for EPR. It's worth noting, however, that if you are selling a good, that your goods might fall into more than one category. So an example of this is if I'm selling a mobile phone, I will be needing to register for packaging, electronic and electronic equipment, and batteries themselves. And if I'm selling in France and in Germany, that's 6 different EPR registration numbers. Another example of this, which I know Mike's really proud of, and he may have mentioned it already this morning, is a Christmas jumper. So if you're like myself and want to buy one of those Christmas jumpers that's all singing, all dancing, lots of flashing lights, plays loads of music, you're looking at packaging, textiles, electronics, batteries. So it's definitely something that you need to be taking into consideration when you're putting these goods onto the market, that even the most fun of items that you're selling could potentially mean that you need more EPR registration numbers, which I guess in itself is just as fun. So moving on to how Avask can help you. We run a service here at Avask to enable you to be able to register for EPR and those relevant EPR registration numbers. We offer a registration service at a one-time fee. This requires a registration with the relevant PRO, which is a producer responsibility organization. This is essentially your EPR tax office. Each category in each country has one of them, and you will need to register directly with the relevant PROs, which we can assist you with. We also offer a reporting service at an annual fee, including declaration of the sales of the products that you're putting onto the market, covered by the different EPR categories to the respective PROs for the applicable reporting periods. Now, when we're looking at reporting periods, these filings occur either monthly, quarterly, or annually, depending on the country and category. But what we do need to be looking into is at the beginning, when we're first registering, we need to forecast a filing ahead. So it's not just once a year we're doing a filing, we're looking ahead at those forecasted figures of what you're putting onto the market in Germany and France, and then forecasting that to the relevant organization for 2022. We also offer an authorized representation service. This comes at an annual fee, and this is where it's required, which is only in the electronics category in both France and Germany. So we can assist you with that as well. So moving away from the service that we can provide and to the actual payment of the EPR contributions themselves. As I mentioned earlier, it's just a fancy way of a small taxation put onto making you aware of how to sell sustainably into the French and the German markets. Businesses must pay eco-contributions to the relevant PROs in accordance with their reporting. Unlike VAT, it's not set at a percentage. It's set by 4 different bullet points. So we've got the EPR product category, the device type itself, the product attributes, and most importantly, the volume and the number of weights sold within the EPR category. So we're very much looking at the goods that you're putting onto the market themselves and at what volume that you're selling these goods. Now, everybody's favorite, deadlines. As mentioned already, Germany, the deadlines are fast approaching. France, it has already passed. So the deadlines for France in the 7 original categories, so excluding chemicals, excluding piercing medical equipment, the deadline for this was the 1st of January 2022. With France, they've kind of given people a little bit of leeway. They're currently accepting late registrations. However, we would strongly advise to start now to avoid penalties. Moving on to Germany, I think we would be very, very lucky if Germany were to give us any leeway as of the 1st of July. 1st of July 2022, we see the deadline for packaging coming into effect in Germany. And also then the 1st of January 2023 for electrics as well. They haven't kind of given a strict deadline for batteries, but I wouldn't be surprised if they tie that in with the electronics deadline for the 1st of January of next year, just because they kind of work hand in hand. German registration times are already increasing very, very rapidly. Even though July the 1st, it seems miles away, summer will be creeping around the corner, as will our EPR German deadlines. So please make sure that you are bearing this in mind when you're going to sell onto the German markets. Just because you don't want to get caught out and have your listings removed, it's going to affect your sales for the whole year. So just really something to bear in mind. And that's essentially all the information on EPR. I hope that cleared up any confusion or any sort of doubt about what EPR was. As I said before, we have a department here at Avask that would be very happy to help you. On the screen now are my details and also the team's email link as well if you want to get in touch. Or if you just want to have a little bit more information, that's absolutely fine. We're happy to help. So please do reach out.
That's absolutely lovely. Thank you so much, Ellie. Don't forget, guys, keep your questions coming if you have any. We have a couple of questions that have already come in. So the first question is, if I have an EPR number from a manufacturer, do they pay the tax or do I have to pay the tax?
So if you've got your EPR number from your upstream supplier, they will then be kind of taking into account the entire journey and the life cycle of your products that you have. This is obviously something you need to negotiate with your upstream supplier. The likelihood is if they are a very large corporation, that they're unlikely to want to pass that number on to you. So it's definitely something that you have to kind of negotiate with them. This is just purely because obviously they have to then take into account what you're selling, and then do your filings on your behalf and really keep an eye on the goods that you're putting onto the market. So I would just be having those conversations with your upstream suppliers and making them aware that it is an option for you to take over that number. But also it then makes you aware further down the line that if you do have that need to register, you're not going to get caught out by those deadlines.
Okay, that's absolutely lovely. Thank you. Are there types of packaging that don't attract any EPR tax or that have a lower tax? E.g., should I repackage paper and card rather than a blister pack? And if so, will this lower the tax?
That's a great question, actually. Unfortunately, there's no types of packaging that don't attract the EPR tax. It's pretty much capturing a very, very wide net of sellers, especially selling on Amazon, eBay, all of your online marketplaces. Essentially, the way that it's calculated for packaging, especially in Germany, is they do look at the type of packaging that you are using, so the material at which the goods are packaged in. From the 1st of July 2022, you will be obliged to take into account your secondary packaging as well. So this is not just the packaging that you're putting the goods in. This is the packaging that Amazon are then shipping your goods in. What I will say about the primary packaging is that these are not, with the contributions, they're not amounts that are supposed to deter you from selling. They're just a way of putting a sustainable kind of additional step onto selling into the German marketplaces and the French German marketplaces, just to make you aware of how to sell more sustainably. So naturally, for example, 50 kilos of plastics will incur a higher cost than 50 kilos of cardboard, just because it's easier to recycle, is much easier for them to dispose of. So there is a slight difference in the scale, especially for Germany.
Okay, that's absolutely lovely. Thank you, Ellie. Another question has just come in. When you say packaging, is this the product pack or the delivery packaging? If I ship the product pack, just attaching a label, can I avoid the packaging tax?
So you can. That is a very good question and a very good way of dealing with it. Unfortunately, it wouldn't be avoiding the packaging tax overall, it would, because your goods still need to be packaged in order to protect the product. What I would say is it potentially could then negate the need for taking into account your secondary packaging if you're just attaching a label to your primary packaging. But overall, you would still very much have an obligation to register for the packaging category, because your goods are packaged in order to protect them.
Okay, so just to clarify then, the primary packaging, if I'm buying a keyboard, it comes in a box with a nice little logo on it. That's the primary packaging.
Correct.
And then the secondary packaging is the thing that is the box that Amazon puts it in to ship it to you.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for clearing that up. Okay, another question has just come in. Amazon have said that they are collecting EPR for France and will bill me later. How do I know how much I'm liable for before the bill arrives? I don't want to sell at a loss.
No, that's a very good point. So I think the way that Amazon have kind of dealt with the French deadline and the French legislation coming in very quickly at the beginning of this year was they've essentially said for the next kind of 3 to 4 months or whatever, we'll cover you. We'll ensure that we're not going to remove any of your listings. We'll make sure that you can still continue to sell on our marketplace at the beginning of the year. The likelihood is that they, as you mentioned, they will then ask for this money back if they're covering you for the first couple of months of 2022, which kind of then brings into effect the fact that the need to register is still very much there. I think when you register your EPR numbers yourself, you're very aware of what you're selling. Everything's very visible to you. You know which contributions are being sold, are being paid, which is why I would then also push the need for you to register yourselves. I think with Germany, when we're looking at the deadlines coming in July, there will be no kind of leeway. They will be very strict on the deadlines that they're putting in place. So although Amazon have they've kind of already covered your back slightly, they're not going to do it out of the goodness of their hearts. Essentially, that they will require some payment back. But yeah, I would just, for ease, I would just get registering yourself. It is just for the long run, especially with EPR kind of expanding all over Europe. Most likely within the next 5 to 10 years, you're looking at a full expansion across Europe. Lots of different countries taking it on board because everybody's got these targets to hit before 2030 for the environment and to up their sustainability efforts. So the likelihood is that not every single marketplace, not every single Amazon marketplace is going to be able to offer this kind of this ability for them to pay on your behalf. So I would get those registration numbers in now.
That's lovely. Thank you so much. And the next question, funnily enough, is exactly what you were just talking about, is will EPR happen in the UK?
Well, there are no confirmed dates, but I wouldn't be surprised. I think the UK is very likely to follow suit. I would kind of almost guess that Spain would be the next ones to kind of fall into the pattern of EPR, with the UK not far behind. I would expect it to kind of explode all over Europe. So it's definitely something that's not going away. It's sticking around for the foreseeable.
That's lovely. Thank you. Another question that's come in. We sell white goods and offer a take-back service when we deliver an appliance. So we can offset the EPR. Can we offset the EPR as we undertake the disposal?
That's definitely something that would need to be looked into. I think that's a very specific case. With white goods, they fall under a very niche category. It's something that would need to be discussed with the relevant organisation. I think at the moment, the scope for the organisations, they've given kind of very vague information, especially kind of in France. They're looking at expanding the information where it's very new, and kind of everybody's learning, we're learning, sellers are learning, the organizations themselves are learning. It's definitely something where specific cases come in and then they look to change. But I'd be very happy to look into that if that was the case for a seller.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Just another question. We sell furniture and we are not the manufacturer, but the furniture comes on a pallet and the rest of the packaging. Do we need to register for both furniture and the packaging?
Yes, this is correct.
Okay, that's perfect. And are there any plans to unify the application process where one application is submitted and covers all EU countries?
I have heard talks about this. I know that there are lots of organisations that are pushing for this just to make the process a little bit easier. The kind of idea at the moment is to keep them all separate. However, I think in terms of longevity and it sticking around for a long time, I think there is going to have to be a bit of improvement, a little bit of growth within the legislation itself in order for kind of everybody to make this an easy process. I think where we're very much at the start of the legislation changes, everything's still kind of piecing together, but it's definitely something that I have heard of, and it could potentially be on the horizon.
Okay, yeah, it would make sense, especially when they're doing things like OSS and IOSS to make it simpler. So yes. I think once all the governments get together and everyone's decided on what they're going to be doing, I think you probably are right there. You're going to see them joining up together. Hopefully, yeah, that'll exactly. Be good. Just a reminder for everybody in the audience, if you can please submit your questions. If there's anything else you wanted to ask Ellie, we've still got a little bit of time to run through the session, so please get your questions in now. There's a few more minutes remaining. So what happens to the tax? Is it ring-fenced for sustainability, or does it end up in general taxation?
I think the idea of kind of like the eco contributions is to fund the disposal of these products. So although it is kind of a taxation as such, these products that we're looking at and the categories that have been selected, they require specific disposal, of which does cost money. So I believe the taxation would then go back into the disposal of these goods. It's just to make people more aware that if you are selling larger goods and they require, for example, like piercing medical equipment, the needles need to be disposed of in a specific way. This is not something that can just be thrown out. They can't just be thrown in the bin. The same with batteries. It's putting a kind of a cost on making aware of the products that you're putting onto the market, and then how they are disposed of and how much this actually costs across the board.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Another question has just come in this moment. I already have goods in Amazon EU FBA. Can I sell these without EPR?
In theory, yes, but I think with your goods being already in the FBA centres, they're already listed on your Amazon. I would strongly advise you not selling them without EPR. The likelihood is that they're not going to be taken down straight away because we haven't reached the deadlines in Germany, and the French are kind of giving a bit more of a leeway, a little bit more of kind of a grace period. However, it's definitely something to be aware of when you're selling these goods. Although the goods are situated in the FBA warehouses and they can just be distributed, it's something that they're not looking at the goods that are in the warehouses, they're looking at your listings online. So just being aware of what you're selling, what goods are on your marketplaces. I know France haven't yet released the portal in which they need to put the EPR number, but Germany already have for packaging. So it would just be a case of looking at the goods that you're selling onto these marketplaces and then going onto the portals, the relevant portals on your seller centrals, and then inputting the numbers just to show compliance. And then those goods in those warehouses will be able to be sold.
Oh, that's absolutely great. Thanks for that. That's really interesting. So another question's just come in. Once we register for EPR, when would we have to start paying the taxes? Would it be backdated? And if so, how many years would we be able to do that for?
That is an excellent question. So there are specific organisations, especially in France. I know that furniture and textiles definitely do this. They look back at the last 3 years in which you've been selling. And so they do look at the backdating from back to about 2019. Apart from that, it would depend kind of on the volume of the goods at which you're selling. But there is a lot of focus on this year coming up. So at the point of registration, like I mentioned before, the organisations request a forecasted filing. This is just because they have targets of their own that they need to be hitting, and that they need to kind of take into account what they need to dispose over the year, and kind of work out ways in which they do that. Then they pay kind of a contribution fee a seller would then pay contribution fee based on that forecasted filing. And then at the end of the year, when we assess everything that's gone on in 2022, then that fee is then just adjusted. So if you paid over the amount, that is then credited for the next year. And if you paid under that amount, you just simply pay the difference.
That's lovely. I've got another question just come in. Hi, Ellie. How quickly are you getting the numbers back from the different offices? So I think that's the EPR registrations.
Amazing. So it kind of differs across the board. Of course, every organisation is different. For Germany packaging, you're looking at about a week for a complete process, which is super speedy, super good. For electronics and batteries, you're looking at a bit longer. I'd say around 10 to 12 weeks at this point, which is why I was really pushing earlier, kind of the necessity to register now, because since the beginning of the new year, this is elongated within about 3 to 4 weeks already. And then for France, you're looking about a couple of weeks, I'd say about 2 to 4 weeks at the moment, definitely for packaging registrations. And then the kind of other organisations, you're looking at about a month.
Oh, that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, no, absolutely. Especially when, as we get closer to the deadline, I'm sure the German waiting times are going to go up and start going through the roof, because I know that they're already going up already, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely. I think also, like, these organizations are quite small themselves. They're not like giant government bodies. They're simply new offices that have been set up all over France and all over Germany. They are minimal in size. So especially where the EPR obligations would then capture a very, very large net of sellers, that they've got a lot of volume to deal with, which is sort of why the need to register kind of now. I know I keep saying it, but I'm telling the truth. Like, please get your registrations in.
That's great. The next question is just very simple. Where do we start?
Where do we start? That is another fantastic question. As I mentioned earlier, we have a team here at Avask, and we're very happy to help you. I know that we have on the presentation, I had my email address and the Avask team email address as well. Or if you were to reach out via our website or via our inquiries mailbox, we have a large team here ready and waiting to help you. So please do reach out. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. And yeah, get you nice and registered.
That's lovely. Exactly. And that email address is avask-epr@avaskgroup.com. So that's really good. Another question's come in. If my company is registered in Italy, but I also have a VAT number in Germany, which VAT number should I use for EPR registration in Germany?
Another good question. So if you're registering in Germany, you have German VAT. This is great. However, the need for having a German VAT number doesn't necessarily apply to EPR, just purely because of the OSS and the ISS registration, like the kind of legislations. You can be making distant sales into these countries and still have an obligation to register. So if you're incorporated in the EU, we do advise that the country of incorporation, that VAT number is used, just because of VAT rates within those countries. However, if you are incorporated outside of the EU, we would use your German VAT number.
That's lovely. Another question's just come in. I sell on Amazon. Which EPR number should I use? German/France, when I don't know where I'm selling until the order comes in.
Okay, so if you don't know where you're selling until the order comes in, the likelihood is that you would need to register for both countries. This is purely because you have the option for buyers to buy these goods in either France or in Germany themselves. So because the option is there for anybody to buy your products. For example, if I was selling on Amazon ES and I had the option open for German sellers to buy my goods or French sellers to buy my goods, I would still have an EPR obligation to register in these countries. That is for all the categories that my goods would fall into. So like my example earlier, if I was selling phones on Amazon Spain, but somebody in Germany could buy my phone, I would need to register for my German EPR numbers in order to stay compliant.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. One more question. My question is regarding packaging. The toys that I sell are building bricks, so cannot be sold without the container, which is the only packaging. So I'm not sure whether this is classed as packaging or not.
Very nice. So if the container would then be considered as your primary packaging. It would depend what this container is made out of. Essentially, if it's part of the good itself, then it's not considered as packaging. But in order for your
So sorry, the fire alarms have appeared to have just gone off, but it's a test of the system. So I'm very sorry about this, everyone. It will stop. There we go. Sorry about that.
At least we know when they're working.
Yes.
Sorry, back to what we were saying. So with the building blocks themselves, it would depend very much on what the box is made out of, but it would still be counted as your primary packaging because you're putting the goods inside that box. The box is then being transported in order to hold those bricks.
Mm-hmm.
That is then being transported to your customer. So the goods are themselves packaged. It would just be a case of whether you have a primary or a secondary packaging obligation.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you. Another question's just come in. If I resell products on Amazon, do I need EPR registration or is it only for the manufacturers?
So if you're the ones reselling and if you're the ones putting those goods into the marketplaces, so if you're importing the goods into France and Germany, manufacturing those goods in either of those countries, or if you're selling those goods into France and Germany and it's not the manufacturers, then you will need to register for EPR. Because you are the ones putting those goods onto the French and German markets, you will then have that obligation to register.
Okay, lovely. And how is EPR calculated? Is it a percentage of the material? Do I need to split into paper, plastic, metals, batteries, etc.?
So it's different for different organizations. So let's take packaging, for example. For Germany, they look at the material at which your packaging is made out of. So it would be a case of weighing the net weight of your packaging. So this is the weight of the packaging without the good inside it itself. And then looking at the material. And then the organizations would kind of calculate a contribution based on that. Based on that kind of figure on those weights that you're looking at. When it comes to other categories, so for electrics, obviously we're not asking you to dismantle the goods in which you are selling because that would be ridiculous and make the goods kind of unsellable in themselves. But for electrics, we'd ask for the full weight of the good itself. For the batteries, obviously you are aware of the batteries that are put into your products. So these are very easily like researchable on the weights of these batteries. Either that, or if they are easily extractable from your good, then we would ask you to weigh them yourself. It's just essentially we're just asking for a very with these contributions, especially for the forecasted filings, we just want to kind of give it the most accurate of contribution estimates so that you're not coming into 2023 with a massive shock about, oh, I wasn't aware that I would be selling this much, or this is not what we calculated right at the very beginning. It's definitely with EPR, it's about declaring what you think that you will be selling, and then at the end of the year looking back on what you actually have been selling. So you don't want to kind of give yourselves any nasty surprises going into the next year with what you're not declaring in 2022.
Thank you. That's very clear. Next question is, I sell cosmetics. Is packaging the only registration that is required?
That is correct. Yes. If you're selling cosmetics, you're selling, for example, like a face cream, you don't need to take into account that anything else with regards to that. If it's just the packaging of that face cream itself.
Okay. Another question is, if I'm already registered for EPR, then I add new products. Do I have to notify anyone regarding this?
This wouldn't be something that you have to kind of do as you go along. It would be very much you're doing a forecasted filing. You're saying this is what I'm going to be selling. However, obviously you're well within your rights to be changing these goods throughout the year. You can put different goods onto the market. That's not a problem. But at the end of kind of when we look back on 2022 in 2023 and we say, okay, what have we been selling? That's when you would kind of need to declare all the new goods that you're putting onto the market. One thing I would say with when you're putting new goods onto the market is to be very aware of actually what you're putting onto these marketplaces. Obviously, if I'm selling cosmetics and then I decide to sell phones as well, I'm then falling into additional categories in which I need to be registered for because I'm then not compliant for the rest of the year. So I think when you're especially moving forwards, especially as this expands across the EU, you need to be kind of more aware of what you're selling going forwards, because you will have these obligations, even if you don't realize that you have them. Amazon Germany will definitely realize that you have them. So it's just making yourself aware of what you're selling first before they realize what you're selling and then realize that you're not compliant. So yes, absolutely fine to add more goods, add more categories as you're going along, but just making sure that you are making those registration and getting those registration numbers as you move forward.
Okay, thanks very much. Another question has just come in. How are filings verified for accuracy?
Very good question. So for the forecasted filing, obviously, much like with VAT, it's you have to declare what you've sold. It's how you stay compliant. It's obviously very difficult for you to predict what you're going to be selling. This is why we kind of ask people to base it on what they sold in 2021. I know 2021, 2020 were very strange years overall, and especially for selling, but great years for e-commerce sellers, great years for selling on online marketplaces. So I mean, we ask sellers to look at 2021 as kind of like a template for what they think is going to happen in 2022. There's kind of no way of knowing what you're going to be doing for this year. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen. But then moving on to 2023, I believe different marketplaces are putting kind of portals and reporting systems in place, especially as this legislation grows across different countries. They're putting much like where you're able to download sales reports for your VAT filings, it'll be very much the same as that, where you download an EPR specific reporting structure and then providing that to the organization. So it wouldn't be something that you necessarily have to keep like jotting down every time you make a sale or every time you put a new product onto the market. It's something that these online marketplaces will recognize for themselves.
That's absolutely lovely. Another question that's come in is, do you have to include your EPR registration number on your product or packaging?
The EPR product, the EPR number itself, no, you do not. This just goes onto your online marketplace in order to show compliance. One thing that I will mention with putting stuff onto products is especially when you're looking at France, they do now request an additional logo to be added to your packaging. This is called the Treeman logo. The likelihood is that this is not France will not be the only country that will be rolling this out. It's just an additional logo that goes onto the packaging to show compliance. It's essentially a very small recycling logo. Obviously, if you'd like to get in contact and learn a little bit more about that logo and things like that, I'd be more than happy to go through things with you. But it's that kind of legislation doesn't come into effect until the beginning of January 2023. So there's definitely enough time to account for all packaging changeover times and things like that, obviously, because people have lead times for changing packaging. It's not just an overnight situation. So organizations have been very aware of that. But the number itself doesn't need to actually be present on the products. This is just purely a compliance number, much like your VAT number. It's just a way of showing compliance for legislation that's come into place.
Thanks very much. Okay, so another comment that's just come in says, this is all news to me. Roughly what percentage of turnover is EPR?
It's all news to a lot of us. Obviously it's not, I wouldn't be able to kind of give you a definite figure on that, a definite percentage, just purely because it's based on the goods that you're putting onto the market themselves. It's based on the volume at which you're selling. It's very much based on the weight of the goods. Like if you're selling a heavier product, or you're wrapping it in loads and loads of plastic, you're putting a plastic covering, you're then putting cardboard, you're then putting another layer of film, you're then going to incur a much higher cost than, for example, if I was selling a lighter product or a product that was heavy but with very thin packaging, for example, or just a cheaper packaging, for example, cardboard over plastics. What I would say, and I believe I said it earlier, but I do reiterate this, because these are not meant to deter you from selling at all. They're not meant to stop you from wanting to sell into Germany and France. They're not trying to stop you from expanding into Europe as this kind of expands across the continent. It's merely just a way of making you more aware of more sustainable ways of selling. I know everything is kind of more about the environment these days. We've got to be a lot more conscious about the way in which we're doing it, and it is kind of putting a bit more of a financial spin onto the environment. But these are not supposed to be like bank breaking figures. They're not meant to stop you from selling or corrupt your businesses in any way. It's just an additional thing to take into consideration. So although it's not a percentage that I would be able to tell you, these are kind of, we're looking at minimal numbers here.
Okay, thank you very much. Another person has asked for clarification that if I resell a product on Amazon, do I need an EPR registration number, or can I use the manufacturer's?
Yes, so if you're importing, manufacturing or selling these goods into the French and German marketplaces at the moment, you will have an obligation. So if I'm buying, for example, a phone off of Apple and then I'm reselling it, I would then have the obligation, because those are my goods that are going into the German or the French markets. So although, like, if you have a seller that's in Germany and they're selling the goods to you, they will have an obligation because they're selling the goods to you in the German marketplace. But as the reseller yourself, you will also have the obligation.
That's lovely, thank you. And I think that really clarifies the point quite nicely. Does it make a difference if the seller is classed as an SME or a micro business?
That is a very good question, and no, it doesn't. Unfortunately, there are kind of no thresholds in place at the moment. It's very much anybody that's selling, anybody that has is making sales into these marketplaces, regardless of the size of your business. You will need to register. You have to have these numbers in order to stay compliant.
Okay, that's lovely, thank you. And does Poland have an EPR requirement for packaging yet?
Not yet, but don't hold your breath.
It would be probably in the next year or so, probably.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
Absolutely. Okay, so I am coming to the end of the questions that we've got on file on record here. So Ellie, is there anything else you wanted to say about EPR and any advice you want to give to the sellers?
I would just kind of reiterate about these contribution numbers. I think it's kind of throwing people off slightly. Just where it is such a new thing, it's a new legislation coming in. There's a lot of lack of information being kind of put out onto the internet and stuff. Like if I were to Google EPR, there's not a lot of information that comes up, and I think it's from the people that I've spoken to, from the clients that I have dealt with so far, it's very much people are nervous about the impacts that these are going to have about on their businesses. To which I would kind of say, like, it's just an additional step. It's just an additional step that's going into selling. And as I mentioned, these prices, these contribution fees are not huge. For example, if I was to sell under 10,000 units in France, I'm looking at around 80 euros worth of packaging contribution. So it's not in the grand scheme of things, obviously, with volume increasing, with weights of packaging upping as my volume increases. I do mention packaging a lot just because everybody has these obligations. It's all relative to the sales that you're bringing in. It's all relative to the revenue that you're making. So if you're selling like 40,000 units, you're obviously going to have a bigger contribution fee to pay than somebody who's only selling 400 units, for example. So it's just something to be aware of. I think as kind of time goes on and as it rolls out even further, there's definitely going to be more information, and hopefully, as we discussed earlier, just a bit more continuity across the countries and a bit more kind of a better plan in order to make this a lot easier process for everybody. But kind of whilst the process is still a little bit tricky, whilst the process is kind of a bit complicated, a bit fresh, a bit new, we are here to assist. That's why we have the service. It's why we have a very capable department in order to assist you with these registrations. So if there is any doubt, if there is any confusion or anything that we can do to help, we're very happy to do so.
Thank you very much, Ellie. And I think I've got time for one last question. What does textiles cover? Is this raw fabrics, or does it include like the finished product, like bedding, bath towels, etc.?
So for textiles, you're looking at the textiles that have been made into products. So you're looking at shoes, you're looking at like clothing, towels, bed linen, that kind of things. It doesn't cover the raw materials aspect at the moment. Now, this doesn't mean to say that it won't in the future. I think it's very much with EPR, it's very much ever changing, ever growing. So it's definitely worth keeping on top of these categories. Also, I would be very surprised, because France have just added 2 new categories, the chemicals and the piercing medical equipment, that not only will these kind of aspects of the organizations and what they cover grow, but also that the new categories that are coming into play as well. Obviously, I don't know what's going to come next, but it could be anything. But at the moment, yeah, it's just covering those that are made into an actual good rather than the raw materials itself for textiles.
Okay, thank you. I have actually just scrolled through and found one more question, if we've got time.
Yeah.
That is, since the deadline for EEE registration in Germany is the 1st of January 23, does this mean I only need to report the sales of those products from the year starting 2023?
I think it will be down to what Germany kind of decide when they put this legislation into play. At the moment, they haven't really given any idea of whether they'll be looking back at backdating. So I would definitely be aware of what you have sold in the past, and then what you are looking to sell in 2023. I'm hoping that this is going to be a bit clearer kind of as the year goes on. We are still kind of a year out on the German legislation for electronics and for batteries. So I think they'd be looking ahead. My personal opinion would be that they'd be looking ahead for what you will be selling, but that's, I mean, I am not the German organization, so unfortunately, they could then look back at what you've been selling over the past 3 years, much like furniture have in France, much like textiles have in France as well. As I said, each organization kind of has different rules and regulations which are ever evolving and ever changing, so it's about keeping on top of those.
Ellie, thank you so much. That was absolutely wonderful. And
My pleasure.
Thank you so much to everyone for your plethora of questions. There were lots and lots of them. If you do have any more questions that you need to ask Ellie, please do feel free to email her. You can also email the Avask team at avast-epr@avaskgroup.com or visit www.avaskgroup.com/EPR for more information. We've also got a handy Q&A ebook which you can download and refer back to. Ellie, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and it's been absolutely wonderful hearing all of this stuff about EPR again.
That's all right, Mike. Thank you very much for having me.